Good afternoon, morning. Good morning. Thank you. Good morning's work ahead of us. The theme of our work today is Italian architecture and tactile photography. In the plan, as written at the Blind Institute, Francesca Cavazza. It's important to understand why this has been written, because Italian architecture and tactile photography is a possible, it's a theme that is possible and impossible. It's certainly a very ambitious theme. So why is this link so important between the Institute of the Blind and this theme today? The reason is that this institute has always committed itself deeply to this sort of activity. It's a very important institute that has gained much respect in terms of academic and has formed many students at this institute. Also with the museum that we saw upstairs, which has really challenged a concept that seems impossible. That is, cultural goods, especially paintings, can be understood within, and even produced by blind people. So thanks to this important link between the two disciplines, we're very grateful to have the President, the Director of the Institute with us, Professor Michele Borga. There's also the Director, Mario Barbuto, who's going to talk to us with the President. So thank you, Michele, for saying hello to us. Very briefly, I'm here today to very briefly introduce this initiative, which we've accompanied through the organization of our museum and the challenge of making pictures, painting accessible to people who are blind as well. This challenge, this innovative challenge, this new perspective, which we're following with great attention and care. So I'd like to thank all our technicians who are involved in the project. And along the way in this challenge, there's a very good group of people has come to light, who are becoming ever clearer about the concept of this challenge before us, and we can't but be very proud of their work. So thank you for being here today. And we'll see what possibilities this initiative will open for our institution as well. So everything seems to be working fine. Miriam Trelese will introduce today's work. Her role is directing this experience, so we're going to wait for her to help us and direct us to understanding the situation. Good morning, everyone. Good morning, everyone here today and everyone who's following us in Europe. We're here today in the Institution of the Blind, Francesca Cavazza. I'm going to talk slowly because there's a translator. to document a special experience and open a debate concerning photography with people with visual impairment and the way this could be translated into three-dimensional forms, which can be very useful for tactile perception of forms. This project is being financed by the European Community, the life learning program Grundtvig. It involves participation of 12 learners from Europe and 4 people from Italian, 2 of these who are visually impaired and 2 of these who are blind.
L'obiettivo era realizzare uno spazio europeo di apprendimento, learning by doing, che permettesse il confronto tra differenti culture.
So our idea is to open a space called Learning and Doing, where we confront different ways of learning. So we're opening a new argument on new ways of learning, which can open ways to art to more people, even with disabilities. Later we will see a three-dimensional photographic exhibition realized by the architect Fornazzari, who will document this process after the conference. In our exhibition there are some photographs of Bolognese architecture which were taken in part by a professional photographer, whereas 2 of these people have been realized, 2 of these works have been realized by a visually impaired person and a blind person during the workshop. The photographic works, the translations of the photography into three-dimensional works have been guided by Dottoressa Secchi, whose 20 years of experience has guided the process, while explaining the critical aspects of this new work of translation from pictures into three-dimensional objects. The exhibition will show the work undertaken during the workshop with the photography of the photographer and some of the participants of the workshop. Loretta Secchi will explain to us the learning process that can be employed using tactile skills, whereas Stefanis, the person the expert technician who created the three-dimensional forms, will show us the techniques of doing so, whereas Fornazzari will show us the exhibition. You can write to us through email or Twitter in live if you wish to. So if you're listening and want to ask questions, you can get in touch with us now live through Twitter or through email. So I'd like to thank the Cavazza Institute for their collaboration and support to this project. I'd like to thank Miriam Tralesi. Now we're going to have the speakers talk. The first speaker is Francesca Biacchezzi, Photography to Tactile Representation, a journey of formation, training and exploration. Good morning. Thank you everyone for being here. I'm Francesca Bianchessi, Tresco Carrassus Association, which was born in Spain in 2009. Our first project using photography and visual disabilities was with the project Polo Sud Sid Limites, which is a pioneering project, which is the first experience in the Association Polo Sud carried out entirely by handicapped people. During this experience we met Eric Villanom, someone who's visually impaired, who is passionate about photography. We immediately created a course for him. So based on a background, a white background, but with more concrete elements, for example, the aeroplane and sledge, which represents the South Pole, which is Polus, the translation of Polar Sud. This is very relevant for the young man. So if we started our research from this starting point, and we became more and more interested in how important photography was for people who are visually impaired, or how Slovena Backpat, for example, international photographers like this, who are visually impaired, have exhibitions internationally. We noticed that there was no course for photography which was adapted to these necessities. Thanks to the Association Catalana d'USE, we started the first European course for people who are visually impaired. This course, then thanks to the Italian Association for the Blind in Genova, we're recapitulating. So all these photographs from this original course have been shown in 2 museums. There's online documentation. So this has all culminated in this initiative at Bologna, this workshop, which has been a wonderful experience, because it's united people who are visually impaired and blind with Italian people and people from the rest of Europe. So there's been a work based on photography and work based on cultural elements. What I've most appreciated about this work is the togetherness, the debates, the arguments that have been created within the group, which has helped us all grow on different levels. During the course, we were able to see some photographs translated into tactile form. In particular, some photographs of the church, the Basilica of Santo Stefano here in Bologna, which were explored both tactily and thanks to a very in-depth explanation from the Dottoressa Secchi, who gave an explanation of the church, the art history of the church, and guided everyone in how to read the photographs of this church. This was then complemented by a real-life visit to the church, which allowed everyone to actually physically touch the material within the church, the stone, the marble, the bricks. We could even touch a bas relief made from marble. We could hear how the sound, how the echo diffused within one of the chapels in Santo Stefano of Saint Sepulchre, which imitates the tomb of Christ. It's an experience which involved all our senses. And thanks to the tactile experience of these photographs, which have been translated to tactile forms, there was a greater appreciation of how this Italian building was constructed. During the course, as well as the tactile photographs, we've also been able to touch some wonderful tactile works of art, translations of great Italian works of art, which has been very helpful in order to confront painting and pictures and photographs. So I'd like to thank you once again. I'd like the people from this workshop to tell us about their experiences directly through photography, from tactile photography, and giving some feedback to this workshop. So I'd first of all like to call Lucia, who comes from Sicily. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to this conference. We're at the end of the workshop now. It's been a wonderful, wonderful experience. When I read the presentation of this workshop before coming here, I was very enthusiastic to be able to learn new techniques, to understand how a photograph can be accessible to a visually impaired person. Sorry, I've got a bit of a cough. So when I came, even though I still doubted at the beginning that we could really appreciate and create works of art and photographs, but at the end of this course I can really say that nothing is impossible. So through using the right techniques to understand the things that are around us, the sounds, the lights, which can sometimes help us in perceiving what's around us. It's been very helpful to understand these techniques in more depth, to actually take some photographs. So to understand how accessible photographs can be to us. Thanks to these techniques, we've understood also about three-dimensional photography. So thanks to the museum, these works of art, these three-dimensional works of art have also been extremely accessible to us. It's been a wonderful experience. I'm very, very enthusiastic. Thank you for the commitment, for the people who've organised the project, for the teachers, the professors who've followed us step by step to help us go and analyse the stuff that's around us. So the photograph is also a study of what's around us, of the beauty that surrounds us. So one of the loveliest examples that I can tell you about is photographing the tower with the clock, one of the big towers here in Bologna. I wanted to understand what the architectural structure was like of that building, of the tower. But I understood it was a very tall tower, so it was impossible to understand through touch. So through a photo, an explanation, and the translation to tactile photography, I could 100% understand the structure afterwards. So all these techniques about photography, zoom, focus, they're all new techniques to me, so I'm very satisfied. I'd like to thank everyone again, all the professors, everyone here involved, for all their collaboration and help. Applause. I'd like to say that it's been a great pleasure to us today. And I must say that tactile techniques are a new thing in Eastern Europe. And I'm working in tourism. I'm a manager of the tourist office. And I know the things that are going on in this field and in Eastern Europe. They're new, working with braille text, not with tactile forms. And I think that everybody who is not blind must go through such a course just to understand better blind people. because especially this tactile technique shows us how different the world could be if you just cannot see.
Perché una fotografia tradotta in modo tattile ci può far capire, no? Come può essere un altro punto di vista diverso.
And I think even more I would say that every person who is not blind person must probably do these kind of exercises, like going one day from point A to point B with their eyes closed.
Secondo lui sarebbe interessante che anche le persone non vedenti provassero questa esperienza o che provassero anche ad andare ad esempio da un punto all'altro con gli occhi chiusi.
Just to conclude, it's a really fantastic course, fantastic workshop, and thank you very much, Mrs. Miriam, and all the staff and our teachers, because
Grazie, è stato un fantastico workshop, una fantastica esperienza e voglio ringraziare Miriam e i professori.
And it really giving a new idea, new vision for me.
it's really giving a new idea, a new vision for me, how to help better blind people.
Mi ha dato una nuova idea, un nuovo punto di vista su come poter aiutare le persone con disabilità visiva.
Thank you very much. Applause. Thank you. And now it's going to call Beatrice Daziale, who comes from Genova. Good morning, everybody. I'm Beatrice Daziale from Genoa. This is my second experience of photography, in that I participated, the first one in Genova, in my city, at the course proposed by Just Cucarachas. For me, the beauty of photography is to be able to see with other eyes what I can't see in normal life. So to appreciate the beauty, the aesthetic qualities of artistic monuments, which are all over the place in Italy. So to enjoy their beauty even more. As far as the tactile photography experience is concerned, it's been very wonderful, especially the Anteros Museum, in that I've been able to look in depth into the beauty of painting, which I can't necessarily understand otherwise, even with the help of certain technical equipment. So touching has given me the possibility of seeing and touching and become very moved, which enabled me to understand the pictures in a way that a verbal description can't. So I would like to thank everyone who has been involved in organising this project, and I do hope that from this initiative others will be born. Thank you, everyone. So now it's Claudio Bruno's turn from Rome. Good morning, everyone. So as Francesco was saying, I come from Rome, and my experience is similar to that of Beatrice. So I am also visually impaired. At Rome, I'd already taken some photographs with other visually impaired people. So, in Rome, we took some photographs in the city, and then we told each other about them together. Now, the idea of coming to Bologna here to participate in this workshop was motivated by the element of tactile photography, which is a completely new element for me. I wanted to understand whether it could help me to understand better the photographs that I took. What I'd like to reflect on is that tactile photography for us visually impaired people is useful to have a first idea of the photograph, but what I think is even more important is to look in depth afterwards. Which helps me understand particular things about the image that I wouldn't normally notice. The other thing I'd like to comment on I'm always surprised on what I've actually taken when I work on them afterwards. The other consideration I'd like to make is that I've learned how to use the camera very well, something that I previously understood only superficially. Couldn't really understand whether there was a flash or not. For example, technical elements like putting the battery and the memory card, these are all things that have actually helped me very much to understand the global picture of taking photographs. So to conclude, Paolo from Bologna. Good morning. Paolo, blind. I believe that in everyone's DNA with a handicap, the tendency to go beyond the limits that you should have, that people think you have, that you think you have. So it is logical that a blind person decides to take photographs. But I don't believe in photographs taken by blind people. Even after this course, I still don't believe in it. I've explored this very willingly, but I still don't think photographs can be taken by blind people. It's a paradox for me. Even if there are some blind photographers, famous blind photographers, around the world, it is a reality that exists somewhere. I'd like to talk about tactile photography now. It really does interest me. It does interest me a lot. Even though we have to understand what it is useful for. Does it help us to be better informed, or does it help us to be more able? Does it help us to move around easier? No, it doesn't help us move around easier. Maps are useful for that. It does help in terms of information. I had no idea how the facade of the Basilica di Santo Stefano was. And the photograph represents it with a very clear level of representation. But what do you understand? You understand how it's made. If you want to understand if it's elegant, thin, majestic, this, however, can't be portrayed. I can't confront this with other elements. So a tactile photograph becomes very useful if you can confront it and compare it with other experiences. So for us blind people, the experience of touch is unfortunately very limited. There are lots of things that we can't experience just with touch. So we've talked about this with a lot of sincerity during the workshop, and it's been one of the positive aspects of this course, being able to talk about it. In fact, I don't just want to say negative things, so I'm going to talk about more positive things now. Another positive aspect of the workshop is that for a long time, I haven't really had anything to do with visual images. And I know they're around, but I've never had anything to do with them. Whereas in this workshop, I understood that it is, it's reminded me that it's very important to be aware of images for different reasons. In ancient rhetoric, in order to develop memory, the technique of associating memory and place, something that you have to remember, and the place in which you remember it, is a very important technique. So this today is also a very important technique. So you can link an image with something to be remembered. And the memory for us is something that really does interest us as visually impaired people. We also, knowledge of the world in general is something that interests us very much. So tactile photography and bas relief reproduction of representations of works of art, visual art, we hope that they will help us mature this experience that today we don't have, so that we can make more contrasts and confront with other techniques and to understand things better. Thank you very much. So thank you very much for these words which give us which do highlight the quality of this formation training process of the workshop. So the link between the activity, the touch, cognitive elements, and sensomotory elements is very important. So the fact that a camera is a mediator, but isn't what actually gives us the image. Rather, the image is given by the camera, the person who takes the photograph, and the person who sees it or reads it. And the person who reads or sees it will perceive it from their own cultural point of view. What they expect from the photograph will influence how they see it. So all this mixture of elements, these three aspects, then gives a result based on the quality of the experience. How to appreciate this with knowledge, consciously. So from these words from our workshop participants, I think we have been given this impression of the quality of the experience. So now I give the word to Dottoressa Secchi, touching art and creating thought. Good morning, everyone. I believe that it's useful in this context to not to concentrate on the story of the Tactile Museum, because the people present here this morning already know about the history of the museum, and they know why, they know about the history of and the use of translation of art to tactile forms. I do, however, think it's more important to understand so-called points of contact, the accessibility of photography and aesthetic education, which aims to harmonize the complexity which exists between knowledge of form, of crude, naked form, quality of perception, knowledge of the form, and development of the understanding of meaning of its content. Understanding the reality which surrounds us, thanks to a photograph, can be an opportunity and also an illusion. Because by giving to understand this photograph, we need to elaborate. This re-elaboration is the right, is something that the technique will give us. When we understood each other the first time, we understood that this was one of the main problems. So, to understand a photograph, to translate a photograph would reduce the details and the architectural qualities of a building, for example, which to understand we would need a proper study and a reconstruction of all the elements to understand that building. And we understood the problem of the faithfulness of the picture. The faithfulness of the picture is very important. But we can't understand that even the best translation doesn't betray, and to a certain extent, every translation will always take away something, change something in terms of reality. It will give us a filtered reality, in some way, selected reality. If we accept this limit, we can also accept the limit between the understanding of reality and the infinite variabilities of consciousness and knowledge. When many years ago we started working on the translation of art, often we were confronted with a real sense of suffering, because to make great works of art accessible meant opening up for people who are visually impaired the possibility of understanding the many interpretational forms and meanings of the images. So what images are saying, if you confront them with the thought and culture of the people. So this is why we're talking about the education to the image, aesthetic education. Understanding reality and let it blossom within us, giving us the right to re-understand it. If we understand models of representation, which are also models of thought, without risking without reducing it to a crude oversimplification or over-representation. And we have to work together to try and understand how we can communicate and translate this reality, that we can perceive in direct and indirect ways, a reality that we can reconstruct in our mental representation, which is the richness of the human mind and the great resource of intelligence. Thank you very much. So thank you very much to Loretta. We get an idea of the complexity of this adventure from what she said, but we can see that there are all some very secure foundations and bases. So, Musei a Terra is like other museums, like the one in Ancona and others in Europe. Is to guide us how things can be translated and reduced into other forms. It's not a simple idea. So the idea of something that some things which are considered impossible are sometimes possible. So the idea of not being convinced that because something has always been in a certain way, it necessarily has to stay that way. So if we have a certain prejudice, it wouldn't help us to go ahead. We look at so the idea of perfectioning the human being was introduced in literature from the 17 and 1800s. And this is a journey that we are continuing to evolve, always challenging our limits. So Loretta and institution from Croatia have greatly helped us along this road. So this is now Fiorenza del Fanes, who's expert in three-dimensional structures, re-representation, translation. His experience is fundamental. Good morning, everyone. I'm Fiorenza del Fanes. I am the director of an association dealing with translation of images. So I was the only person who had no experience in this area at the beginning of this workshop. So I usually we usually propose to companies, but we decided to extend this to the private sector. So we put up an initiative which sold three-dimensional photographs. So we usually dealing with portraits which were slightly in relief, but with colours, combining the colours to give a very strong visual impact. So we put on our website, on our e-commerce website. Without knowing it, it's a solution that could be perfectly adapted to visually impaired people. So thanks to this, what we put on our website, Miriam contacted us, who was already working on the Grundtvig workshop, and she asked us for some information. So I understood what she was talking about, the necessity of our help, and I said, okay, sure. So the first thing we did was 3 reproductions, and I sent them to Miriam, and on the phone we were told that our work was very much appreciated, but there's more to work on. So I immediately understood the delicacy of what we're up against. And so I decided to come to Bologna immediately to the Cavazzi Institute and meet Professor Secchi and the collaborators whose names I can't remember at the moment, Gianpaolo and Stefano, Enrico, etc., to understand together what needs to be changed from the first photographs that we sent. So there were limits. We understood some very important concepts through talking together, and I went back to my office to work on these tactile photographs again. So as soon as I got back home, I contacted my web designer and I got him to cancel the photograph on the website, which had the caption "Ideal for visually impaired people." So, talking to Dr. Secchi, we understood the best way to make these photographs. So, first of all, we put them onto our software, and through the shade, the shadows, the software pulled out the surfaces which needed to be emphasized. But the software obviously can't understand what is nearer to us in terms of perspective. So what helped us get to the final project was to trace the photograph line by line, to manually work on the photographs line by line. And every line, obviously in the limits of the scale, because we reproduced the photo given a particular scale. So we started working on this, and after this we came back to Bologna to evaluate the product. It was the right road this time, but there were still some problems, and these were linked to those with respect to the perspective, to relief which was too subtle, unperceivable from a tactile point of view. So how the photograph can be understood, this was the main problem, that it was really readable. So what was different about these photographs? We didn't want to just portray the architectural structure which was taken by the photograph, but what the photograph was portraying in its totality. This was our real challenge. So if the light was strange, if there were clouds, if there was a tree blowing in the wind, we wanted to portray this. So with our 3D printer, we then carried out these 3D photos. So after our third meeting at the Cavazzi Institute, we managed to get to the final product. And what I want to say about this experience is that the greatest satisfaction has been seeing people who have understood, thanks to touch, who have understood the photo. And this has been a wonderful reward for all the effort and hard work that we've put into this for a number of months now. We first met in 2011, so it's been very interesting trying to understand the needs that we had to satisfy, and understand our needs as well and our limits, and get a final result that actually worked. So, as with any work that we are confronted with, any challenge, what we always need to do is get to a product, to have the humility to work together in order to get to a final product. So to avoid making enormous mistakes. So we would like to really thank the Cavazzi Institute for their collaboration and the dottoressa Secchi. So Stefanis has talked to us about how a limit can be a resource. That's how what Gianpaolo was saying to us before in different words. Paolo, before he was talking to us about handicap, saying that people who have a handicap are particularly pushed towards overcoming limits that are often taken for granted. That is, what I mean is we've got the idea of always making ourselves better, always working on ourselves. So having a limit isn't necessarily a bad thing, and it's just a negative thing because that's what pushes you to further research and to discover new possibilities. So in another environment, in the work environment, we can see the same phenomenon, what we were just talked about. So the limits of technology of my experience met the resources and the competencies, the abilities of other people who were willing to come and meet me where my limits would normally have ended and build something new. This is a human condition. Limits are in our history, are in our personal story, world story, human story. We're not really very different from monkeys. We have 98% of DNA with monkeys. And the real difference is in a different aspect. So maybe because we're so limited in terms of being creatures, we're extremely limited creatures if you compare us to other animals. And maybe it's these limits that have really pushed us and to develop our central nervous system. We've had to, survive in the cold without fur. How to catch without claws and teeth. So we've had to build on relationships with other people. And to do this we had to develop language. So language is born from the necessity of relating to other people to survive and then to live. So we're talking about different languages. There's verbal language, which is what people usually whereas verbal language, everyone knows what you mean by a word. We agree what a word means, and that's it. Visual language, however, is mimetic. It talks about what people see in reality. It's not something that we decide means something. So these two elements, these elements can help complete our knowledge, give us a more global knowledge of the world. So iconographic representation cannot be separated from an understanding of reality and relationship with reality. But this is also a limit, because we can also live under the illusion that representation is reality, whereas it's just a representation. So the complexity of this work, which is understood and explains itself every time we encounter it and think about it. We are all surprised and happy when we understand something which we didn't think we could understand before. And this helps us understand that there's actually a lot more to understand than we had thought in front of us. So we'd like to thank Fiorenzo De Fanis for his words, therefore. And now Fabio Fornasari. An exhibition of photographs to see and touch is the title of his short talk. I'd like to thank you for being able to have done this exhibition, carried out this exhibition, which after a few hours won't exist anymore. So it's been great to develop this and to portray to develop all the themes that Loretta Secchi deals with in the institution. Let's talk about language for a moment. Photography and language. Photography is a language which describes landscape, architectural images, not just architectural images, but also landscape. We don't just photograph bits of buildings, but also the clouds above the buildings. So architecture isn't just made of raw materials, like a sculpture, for example, but also of the environment around the architectural work. So, because survival isn't just about communicating with other people, but also how to defend ourselves and how we can live within our environment, surrounding environment. So how we can give meaning to the surrounding environment. So, for example, a cloud or a dangerous element in the environment surrounding us has always been very important for our survival. So the way of perceiving our environment has always been something that's been part of human nature, human knowledge. So when Paolo was talking about breaking and going beyond our limits, that's what we all do a little bit. So we create survival techniques within places that we don't like being in. We incorporate elements that work in different places, and we bring them into places where we don't want to be and we don't like being, to make that existence better, more pleasurable. So if we're talking about visually impaired people, a comparison is taking photographs into the reality of a not visually impaired person. It also helps us people who are not visually impaired to understand something about seeing. And this is the work that Dr. Esther Secchi undertakes, talking about how we understand things through our hands, okay, but really through our mind. So I've tried to reiterate a few things that some of the other people have said, to stress the point that when someone carries out an exhibition, a museum, it's not just about plonking works of art on shelves. We're talking about creating reference points for people who are moving around that space, so that people who are in that space can understand and appropriate the experience, the unique experience of that exhibition, an unrepeatable experience. So there are lots of ways of putting things on a shelf, on a table. A cook can put, there are different types of table. There's a cook's table, there's a surgeon's table. So I've invented my own table. I've used lots of light, even if it's just a tactile. If it's a tactile photography exhibition, but people who are watching are people who can see. So by putting a lot of light in the exhibition, I've emphasized the aspect that you are looking, to make you reflect upon the fact of looking and not looking. So I'm not really going to explain though too much, because the best way to understand is by becoming a part of the things. So if I have a cooked potato, I understand it's cooked by sticking a fork in it, not by looking at the potato and analysing it. So the fork wasn't invented to do that. You know, I don't have to measure it with a thermometer. I just stick a fork in it and understand. So we can be intuitive about understanding very often through looking and touching, simply doing so. By simply doing so, we can understand often a lot more than explaining things analytically. So I'm not going to carry on. Thank you. So I'll ask Bernat if there are any questions. Bernat, are there any questions about? If you'd like to ask questions through Twitter, we have 10 minutes now for questions. If you'd like to ask questions now, we have question time. I would just quickly like to say something. I don't want to risk boring you, but just to help you understand that even if you're completely blind, we have different ways of seeing. If I have a tactile photograph in front of me and I'm exploring it with the right guidance, I create a mental image. So when I speak of this image, it's as if I had it in front of me, as if I was actually seeing it. So this is a way of understanding, of perceiving what surrounds me. Even if I go to a place like this room, I still have a mental image of where I am. So it's not just a question of knowledge. So it's actually useful from all points of view. So when Paolo said that he couldn't understand if something was elegant or majestic just through touch, I don't agree with this. I mean, it's not something that's true for me. When I was touching the church, for example, when I was touching the stone in the church, I understood that it wasn't very elegant. I understood the nature of the church, because touching often gives an indication of certain qualities of the thing that you're touching. So, for example, if you touch silk or canvas, a pair of trousers made out of silk or canvas, you understand that the silk ones are much more elegant. So this is something that really does help us in our life. I just wanted to point out that it's not the same for everyone. So Paolo's got, and I have got different experiences, and though we're both blind. So I'd like to thank everyone who participated in this course. There's been really an enormous amount of collaboration. I'm really happy to see that how many people were interested in tactile photography, how interested they were in experiencing something from our world, and all being part of this project. It's been great fun and a wonderful experience. Thank you, everyone. I'd like to point something out. What Lucia was talking about, having got to know her better, having got to know her and Paolo better, I'd like to mention that Paolo finds it difficult to to create a mental image, an internal mental image, because he's been blind since birth. So whereas Lucia, until the age of 12, was not visually impaired. So this is a valid distinction between the two. This could explain some of the differences in their approach. It's just a comment that not being visually impaired or blind myself, there was bas relief of Christ being crucified. I've seen that painting before, and it didn't move me emotionally in the same way that the original moved me less than the bas relief version did. When I saw the wounds in his hands and his feet in the bas relief, it gave me more, it seemed more realistic to me, even though I know the original. So it takes about 1 week to realize one photo, to make one 3D photo. To get everything ready for today, we did 3 days without going to bed. So it's easier to work on photographs which are dealing with architecture. These are the easiest ones to work on for three-dimensional representation. In terms of cost, we can soften the blow when we can make more reproductions of the same photograph. So the first phase is the modelization, which is 10 hours of work. Then there's a print of the first prototype. So from the first prototype, which we work on manually a lot, touching it in all its points, seeing where it doesn't work, scraping it with sandpaper, working it minute detail. From this first prototype, we then create the print. After this, we use plastic. We use plastic forms to create the images that you'll then see in the tactile photography exhibition. So, from when it's the picture's first, yeah. So we can really reduce costs by working on more than one representation. So the difference between the original print and the version in bas relief, the original work of art and the bas relief art. So isn't it funny how the tactile version should move you less? You'd expect it to move you less, but it gives. You can see that by the fact that sometimes it moves even more is an indication of how the tactile world can sometimes offer you a deepness of experience that the visual world sometimes doesn't. When you turn off your visual senses, you can read with your touch, going directly to what that picture really represents, bypassing the iconographic shared image of the picture. And we move into an iconological level, this dimension. We can also live this level with our eyes, but if we're doing it with our touch, we have to really we have to meditate the form if we're doing it with our touch. It takes time, it takes concentration, it takes time to be able to gain that knowledge. The space is created for our emotions, which then interact with the form, the emotion of form. There's a young man here called Mattia who brought a video with him. very worried that he was late, his train was late. So I would like to ask you if we could watch his video about the clay modelling workshops created by my collaborators, in which you see how the images are reconstructed. It's only 2.5 minutes long. There's a beautiful soundtrack to it as well. If you agree, we could conclude today's talks with this video, which is something which is really truly poetic. Do you agree? I'm a visually impaired person, and I don't know if I got here late and you've already explained some things, but one of my questions is, when you're taking the picture, how do you know where to stand to take it? Then we were talking about correcting photos to make them more realistic. How can you do this if you haven't seen the original image? Professor saying maybe we haven't understood exactly, maybe there's been some misunderstanding, so let me explain better. Because the microphone was faulty, sorry. Her question was this. Lucia is going to answer, because this is one of the things I asked myself before doing the workshop, talking about the analysis of what surrounds us. That's what I was talking about before. Okay, if I was walking next to my professor, my teacher, they would tell me, they would say, we've got a church here. It's here on your left. Here's the wall, and they'd help me touch the wall, and I'd get a feel of the dimensions of the wall, of the church, where the door was, how big it was, where the front was, how high the door was, how high the wall was, the building was, the monument. So I got a first mental image of the building, and then I positioned the camera following the techniques that we've been taught during the workshop, horizontally, vertically, 45% inclination, 90% inclination, or other techniques. So I got better during the workshop, even photographing something that was moving, cars, bicycles, understanding the distance I needed to take from the subject to understand the zoom, how the camera worked. So during the course, you do understand these things, and I got better as the course went on. So we're going to, my name is Marta Giacomoni, I'm Paolo's daughter, and I also participated in this course. I still ask myself how completely blind people can appreciate an experience of taking photographs. I still ask myself the value of this. Someone who's been born blind and is completely blind. But I do know that for someone who's a completely blind person, sharing the experience taking a photograph, sharing it with people who are close to them, who can understand a photograph, who are not visually impaired, sharing with them is certainly a very positive element for a completely blind person. It was very interesting to see Lucia's point of view, who has her own appreciation of photography.
Niente, io anche come fotografa ero abituata appunto a questa
I'm a photographer and
genere di piacere appunto indipendente. Confrontandomi con persone non vedenti, ho visto anche come la fotografia può essere
I've seen how
una importante che
visually impaired people
può venire proprio da dare una testimonianza a persone care che
can appreciate photography by sharing it with people who are not visually impaired. So it gives a different angle onto how photographs can be appreciated, even for visually or non-visually impaired people. This sharing aspect is something that this experience has made me reflect upon. So this is Lucia speaking again. It's also a way of experiencing reality in a different way, living reality in a different way. So yesterday I took a photo, for example, of a bicycle that was coming towards me. So it made me laugh when our professor, our teacher, Fernando, explained to me that in that moment, a bicycle was coming towards me, and there was another one which almost was about to hit me, and he described a scene which I then created mentally, and so then understood completely. There are people who so both blind and non-blind people have different ways of experiencing reality, but is the cognitive process different? No. The cognitive process follows the same rules for blind and non-visually impaired people. So how does the cognitive process of man work for everyone? It works from experience, through a mediation between experience and cognitive process, which is called evocation. We give ourselves a mental image, both talking about blind and non-blind people, which we then archive, this mental image. We archive these images which then become points of reference when we encounter other experiences for association or differentiation, to create new concepts or clarify our old concepts. What does this mean? In this last process, in the last words, before we were talking about whether just tactile experience by itself is enough to give us knowledge. So this makes us think about experience. Do we understand only through experience? This is the main question that we have to ask ourselves. People like Vygotsky say that experience could even impede our knowledge, our growth of knowledge. It says that a child can understand the law of Archimedes more easily than the question of who is my brother, because you always see a brother, you see a brother every day. But if he sees something that floats and doesn't float, he goes, there's a difference, and he asks himself why. So it's this asking ourselves things, is making comparisons on an experiential level that gives us knowledge. So information is a starting point, but only a starting point. Experience, making experience, doing experience, is a journey which should be guided, must be guided. This is why you've understood a series of things through being accompanied by your teachers, your professors, who guided you to construct who guided you, helping you understand what your senses were telling you. These are very important points which can answer very valid doubts that Paola had, for example, or the young lady who was asking us earlier about where we should take the photograph from. These are very valid doubts, but they make us think about the progressive creative process, the creative of acquiring knowledge through experience. We don't have it. We don't have a 100% clear idea of all the complicated process of what we're talking about. Commitment.
Ecco, io volevo fare appunto un ringraziamento collettivo, diciamo, sia alla comunità europea che la condivisione, permette la realizzazione di questi progetti. E questo programma Grundtvig, Live Learning Program, è veramente eccezionale per sostenere questi percorsi di inclusione e di condivisione a livello europeo delle conoscenze. Ringrazio il Cavazza e tutte le persone che sono state disponibili al confronto. Ringrazio qui il professore, la Loretta Secchi e l'insegnante Biacchessi, il tecnico De Fanis, e veramente con il cuore in mano io vi ringrazio, soprattutto anche tutti i discenti, per la grande forza che può dare la condivisione delle conoscenze, perché non possiamo sapere tutto, ma insieme possiamo fare delle cose belle e importanti per tutti. Grazie.